The National Commission on Time and Learning in the early 90s or mid-90s eloquently said we've got the paradigm wrong. If we're going to be in a standards-based world, we should have the standards be the constant in our education equation and let time vary to meet the needs of learners, instead of the system that we inherited, the old system, where time was the constant and we let learning vary and socially promoted people or retained them in grade if they didn't get it. Indeed, Nation at Risk, as early as 1983, said and defined this issue of educational time as one of the next frontiers of education reform. And I would argue that, with the exception of a lot of efforts represented in this room, we failed to embrace that challenge as yet. This is probably the most radical dimension of education reform that was really posed by our movement towards standards. It's the most inconvenient for adults as we think about it. So as a result, we haven't really tackled it. So if we were going to invent a 21st century system of education, and I would argue we don't have the exact vision of what that looks like, we're in an experimental phase. I think we know some things about what it might look like. Here are a few of the things that I think ought to be part of it. Number one, the goal would be the same goal we had in the beginning of this. All means all. We want to educate all of our students to a high standard. We'd have a delivery system that was as robust as our goals. It would have the same kinds of high standards, regular assessment, real accountability. All of what we have been doing with such vigor over the past 18 years here in Massachusetts, now complemented by the Common Core state standards, the new efforts at assessment, and so on and so forth. But we wouldn't persist in the illusion by simply driving standards and accountability ever harder that we will get to the result. We will have arrived at the conclusion that schooling alone in its current shape and form, no matter how much we optimize it, is going to be insufficient until we can get students to come to school ready to learn. That is, to attend and be attentive. And that's going to take a variety of other interventions in order to get all of our students to high standards. We can argue till the cows come home about the different metrics for measuring progress, and all kinds of psychometric discussions that are going on now about how do we get on the top of the head of a pin the actual contribution of different players to the outcomes that we receive. And this is not an unimportant discussion, but it's not the only discussion that we should be having. We should be talking about how to differentiate our education system so it personalizes to each and every student. We find each child where he or she is in early childhood, and we give her what she needs in order to be successful at each stage of our education system and to emerge ready for success in multiple dimensions, in a job, in a democracy, in a family, and as lifelong learners. That's critically important. So, for example, we tackle different problems that we have for different populations in education in different ways. If we have English language learners, we don't persist in the face of common sense, which would argue otherwise, that we're going to, on average, educate all of our English language learners to a new language, while at the same time we keep them at pace in their academic subjects, a task that other students who don't have to learn the language use full time for. We're going to teach them a language and do the other subjects at the same time within the same 6 hours. It doesn't make sense. We're going to have to give them more time if they're going to acquire a new language. And so on and so forth. Just as we differentiate in special education, we're going to have to personalize our approach. We're going to have to engage in much more enrichment outside of school. We're going to have to do for other children what those of us who have privilege routinely do for our own children.